Welcome to The Future of Digital Publishing is GitHub, as I cheekily titled it. I'm going to give a some quick background here, and then each of us will speak. I'll introduce each speaker right before they get up to talk, and then we'll have time. You can, with this group, you can just shout out questions whenever you want to, but we'll also see if we can answer some questions at the end as well. So the background for this. A little bit about where I see digital publishing having been and where we're coming from now, where we're coming out of now, is the statement, today's iBooks is yesterday's Internet Explorer. So my sort of take on the state of digital publishing now is that we are really it's a lot like the web was in the late 90s. We are both in terms of what we can do with digital publishing and what we are doing, what we're able to do, but also the sort of structures of the industry. So back in the late 90s, of course, was the browser wars, when everyone was fighting for sort of market share of who was going to use whose browser was going to sort of be the dominant one. So they were not interoperable. They had different rules that you had to follow. If you want to make a website that worked on one, you had to sort of do a lot to. There's still some of that now, but you have to did a lot to sort of change it to get it to work on the other browser. Microsoft famously packaged Internet Explorer, which I think was maybe called something different at the time, in with its Office suite, and there was a big monopoly issue about, well, you can't just force this browser down people's throats by using your market power. So that kind of thing, the sort of technological state of the web and the sort of the institutional state of the web is what I see, or how I see digital publishing today, where we can't do a whole lot with ebooks. Epub is limited, it's specifically limited, and that's the dominant format of ebooks today. And also, in terms of the players in the market, the big ones especially for museum publishers and people who are trying to do something more than Epub are Ibooks Author is the dominant format, and Adobe Digital Publishing Suite is a dominant format, both of which are specifically aimed at getting on the iPad. DPS will also get on Android and has some other options as well. And actually, they just announced that they'll do the Surface tablet, or Microsoft as well. But it's going to Adobe and Apple sort of battling it out a little bit. It's this one device, the iPad, that's the sexy device everybody wants to be on. Ibooks Author is a simple tool, relatively simple tool to use. It's free to use. It puts you on the iPad and nowhere else. You can give those files away, but you can't sell them anywhere else. They don't work on anything else. They don't often work on older versions of iPads. So they're very limited. Adobe TBS, again, these companies are trying to sort of grab their market share. And for me, as a publisher, a book publisher, forget digital, forget anything else, I want books to be open. I want them in as many hands as possible. I want everybody to be able to read them whether they own that device or not. I don't want the path from my content to be controlled by a company that has other interests in stake other than the content and that connection between author and reader. So for me, what I want to do, and I'm Greg Albers from the Getty publications. And I'll say I've been at the Getty for about a year. Before that, I was running my own press, Whole Art Books, and I did a lot of ebooks with that, and that's how I kind of got into the digital thing. Sorry. Okay, so what I am interested in as a publisher and in digital publishing is open publishing. I want HTML, web-based publishing. I want to use tools and structures that are universal and can be read on many devices and can be used and programmed by many people. No one says you can't write HTML. No one controls that code. People oversee it, but anyone can do it. Anyone can read a web page. You can't. There's a reason why the internet is everything it is. It's because it's completely open. You can get stuff that you don't want, but you can also get stuff that you do want. There's no one sort of putting a barrier between you and those things. The trick, of course, with what I would call open publishing or HTML web publishing, web book publishing, is a big trick of it is it's a different skill set. So Adobe TPS and Ibooks Author are taking advantage of skills we already have in publishing. Adobe TPS specifically works right out of InDesign, so if you're publishing books in print, it's a very easy transition, or a much more easy transition to go into that. So HTML, though, not a lot of book publishers code as well. Not a lot of book publishers have access to coders. I think is changing a little bit. The other big sort of question or is how do you sell a website, essentially? How do you, if you have to monetize, if you have to sell something, which as museums, we like the idea of giving away everything for free, which I think is part of our mission and is good, but not all museums can afford to do that. Someone's got to pay for that somewhere along the chain, and if it's not, if the museum, if it's a small museum can't afford to just publish and support code a site and support an author and give away the stuff, if they can't do that, someone should be able to. And so I want a sort of digital publishing ecosystem that can support paid books, selling websites, whether that's you sell the actual thing and it comes in a package and you open it up, or whether you sell a subscription, or whether, there's many ways we could possibly do it, but there's no easy path to market right now. There's no market to sell into. So that's the background. So today, I want to talk about open web-based publishing in sort of 3 different ways. And so each one of the speakers here, we're going to tackle each one of these. So this is the approach line. So the first is the sort of distributed, open, and ad hoc publishing, which is the GitHub of the title. This is the sort of taking little pieces of open source code from here and there and sort of building it up that way. The second approach, Curtis is going to be talking about. It's the packaged and packaged authoring and publications platforms. So these are things that this is sort of more of a one-stop shop where it gives you the whole tool sort of bundled together. It has its own interfaces. It has its own things plugged in and ready to go for you. And you can work from within that and customize from within that. And then last is the sort of fully customized, all out, this is my thing. And you might be pulling from different sources then too, but it's really about building some unique, complete whole thing, which Avery is going to talk about. So briefly, Curtis Fletcher from, I just jumped right in, I was so excited to talk, from USC and from Scalar. And Avery Schwartz, from the Art Canada Institute. She's the web designer for there, and among other things, she'll be talking about her project. And I'll introduce them in more detail when we get into it. So finally, the goal, I'm hoping that you'll take what you learn here today back to your museum and apply it to your own publishing projects, or if you're at a museum and you're not the publisher at the museum, but you have people publishing, you have people in there doing print books or who are interested in digital books, I hope that you'll take this back and help them through that process, because they won't know the code, they won't know what the options are. So we're sort of presenting you with these options to take back. So that's what I hope will happen. I said lastly, but now lastly, booksandbrowsers.org is another conference that's sort of the future of digital publishing. There was just a conference last month, and all the talks are online, and I encourage you to check them out. The sort of theme was open publishing, and there's a lot of great projects there. I mentioned a couple of them in my talk. The hashtag #DigPublishing we try to use when we can. I don't know what you'll find there now, but if you're looking for information, that's a place to start on Twitter. And then digitalpublishingblicky.com is a blog that I write for and co-run. And I encourage you all to check that out as a resource, read those things, and share your stuff if you're doing something. If you have some interesting idea, if you have some project that you're working on, we would love to have you write for it. Okay. And yes, this slide is just raw HTML, no code, no style sheets or anything. And that, yeah, I did do it intentionally, for better or worse. Okay, so there's me again. Email me. Tweet me. I'm happy. And I'll mention this in the presentation as well, part of what we need to do in digital publishing is develop a community of people doing these things. And in a session earlier today, this idea of the canon of digital, what is the canon of digital humanities? I would ask the same question about digital publishing projects. What are the canon of digital art books right now? What are out there? What are the things that we all should know about, that we should all look to? What are we doing? What's happening? What's going to be coming out 6 months from now? That one of you is out there working on something, and we won't, let us know about it now. So I definitely encourage you to that. I'm always more than happy to talk about it. And then the GitHub. We are on GitHub as of like a month. Well, not officially yet because I haven't gotten approved by the Getty, but we are on GitHub, and there's not much there yet, but we will be there. We intend to continue to contribute to GitHub. I'll talk more about what GitHub is if you don't know. Check us out there. Okay, for my particular talk, I'm going to be talking about bad break there. Definitions and conceptual models of books and code. I'm going to be talking about Git as a workflow for individual books, and I'll talk about what Git is in a second. And then GitHub talk about that too, as the only viable development platform for the future of digital publishing, which again is not true. There are lots of good options, but I want to make yeah. Avery's already like, I'm in trouble with the audience and I'm in trouble with my panelists. Okay, it's a bold statement and it's not. I don't really mean it as such, but it is a provocation. I do mean this seriously when I say that we have this. The future has to be more open, more cooperative, and so forth. That's my argument. And Avery, I want you to be a part of it too. So don't hate me. Okay. So what is Git? Git, there's a thing called Git, and it's a revision control system for code. It tracks, so someone has a code project. They are going along, they say, oh, I want to try something slightly different. I'm going to try to do it another way. They fork that project, they create a second, like a parallel track. They make those changes. And they say, oh yeah, that did work out. I'm going to merge that back into my master. So there's sort of this, it's the idea of this sort of master track and then branches coming off of it. And those branches could go off in completely different directions. They could be dead ends. They can do completely something different. Or they can come back into the master and be incorporated into it. So this is something that an individual coder can use Git on their machine just to sort of keep track of their own projects. GitHub is a project hosting site that uses Git. So GitHub is a website where it's almost a cross between, I guess, sort of a social network for coders in a way. You go there, you post your code, it's connected to your computer, to your code base on your computer if you're working that way. And so you can make changes there. It records up to GitHub. GitHub keeps a copy of everything. Other people can take your code, if you've open sourced it, and fork it, and they can do their own things with it. And then they can say, hey, I did something cool with your code. Do you want to incorporate it back into your master? And you might say, yeah, that's great, awesome, and it records. And it keeps track of every change, and who made that change, and what date, and so you can also sort of roll back history. You can say, oh, well, if I go back to this date, what did it look like then? Who's contributed to this code? So it's keeping track of that as well, which is sort of a critical point. The other thing we're talking about is books. And what are books? What are digital books? I just had to share this. This is from Books and Browsers from the conference I mentioned. Brewster Kahle, the founder of the Internet Archive, among other things, defined books this way: long-form texts that are sold. Because there's this debate now that we're going online, now that more and more digital books are happening, how do we define them? How do we talk about what's a book and what's a website, what's not a book? And I think this gets to something. It doesn't necessarily need to be sold, but the idea that you could sell it, that it could be packaged in a way to sell. And this is a long quote that I'm not in the habit of reading long quotes, but I do want to read this one because this is one of my favorites about book publishing in general. This is by Jason Epstein. He wrote it in 2001. He did a number of things, including he was at the forefront of the paperback revolution and of sort of popularizing classical literature, among other things. He also started the Espresso book machine, which is the print-on-demand book machines that you can, like some libraries and bookstores can have them, where you go in, a patron can go in, pick out a book, and it prints and binds the book for you right there. He wrote this: trade publishing is by nature a cottage industry. Decentralized, improvisational, personal, best performed by small groups of like-minded people, devoted to their craft, jealous of their autonomy, sensitive to the needs of writers and to the diverse interests of readers. This continues to ring true for me. Every time I read this, I think that is what we're doing. That's at its best. I think this sort of captures a lot of what I really love about publishing. The one thing that I would say that's changed, and that I think and I've seen change, is this statement here: jealous of their autonomy. I think in the digital mindset is not that. The digital mindset, I think we appreciate our autonomy, we appreciate our independence, but we're happy to share it. We're happy to give something of ourselves to someone else. We're happy to take that feedback in from someone else. And so I think that there's a shift happening there. Let's go back a little bit. This is the workflow of traditional publishing today for me: editorial, design, production, distribution, marketing, basically. Your book moves from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. It tends to be very siloed. There are conversations happening in between, but each little group has its own functions. Then design came along, or digital came along, and we just sort of tacked on another little silo at the end. But I think there's a very linear, very siloed kind of tradition in publishing, in book publishing. And then on top of that, each publisher has their own, like their silo. They're not talking to one another. You don't know what I'm publishing until I release the list usually. Like, even though I know 4 years ahead of time what I'm publishing, we're not very good at sharing what we do for whatever reason. And I think this has led to some troubles in digital publishing, that we're not talking to each other, we have this sort of culture of, yes, we talk to each other, but not in the sort of way that we really need to be doing. On the other hand, this is a Git structure. This is that forking idea where things can fork off and twist and turn, and other people can come in. And there's a couple key things happening here. One, there's a single master file, so everyone's working on one sort of document. You don't have a Word file, and then an InDesign file, and then an Epub file, and then metadata that's added in at some point, and then you don't have these various different things. It's all in one. The idea is to keep it all in one sort of repository or file, which is critical. Every change in contribution is recorded. I mentioned this as well. So no matter, you have this sort of like an ancestry of your book, of what happened, what went into it, who was involved in it, how did it change, where did we go wrong, if need be. Then it gets really complicated. Then you start bringing in other people's code. You have other things forking off. Things go this way and that way. Other contributors come in that aren't part of your group. But Git manages this all. Whether it's Git or GitHub, this is all managed, this is all controlled. It looks crazy, but it's actually quite safe. So Git allows for and manages this structure. GitHub makes it open and collaborative. So I could publish a book through using Git. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, as it's just sort of as a workflow so I could keep my book in one area and kind of keep track of it a little bit better. Or at GitHub, I would be able to bring it out into the open and have other people sort of comment on it, add to it. Okay, so we're done with the first part there. So Git, number 2, Git as a workflow for individual books. I went past that really fast. Git as a workflow for individual books. There we go. There are 3 companies that I know of, and one of them I just learned about 2 weeks ago, so there could be another one today, that are building publishing tools based on a Git workflow, which means that they have a website. You go in there, you sign up, your team signs up, you're all working on the manuscript itself, on the book. In this website, it's tracking changes, it's tracking contributors, who did what, and it's using Git as the sort of underlying architecture of that. The really important thing is this endpoint. So all this stuff happens, right, in a Git kind of workflow. All these people are adding and contributing and whatever. You don't talk about the formats until the very end point. It's one single file, one format, one thing until the very end, and then it branches out. Then it becomes Mobi, Epub, a print-ready PDF, like a PDF that you could send to a POD printer, high-res images laid out with margins and gutters and the whole thing, running heads, page numbers, and a web PDF, and a web book, in many cases, some sort of HTML output. So the idea is, so basically the whole time, everybody's been working on this one file. They've not been, the proofreader comes in and proofreads right in the thing. It gets, and I know that's problematic too, that's another discussion. Everything is happening to the same file. So when I make a change, so when I say, oh, there's this editorial, there's change to the file, let the printer know that they need to update the printing files. Oh, wait, but we should update our InDesign files here. And oh, wait, now, who's got the master? Who's got the most current version? We have a lot of books at the Getty where they were published within the last 5 years, and we have to go. It's the safest way for us to digitize, to go to HTML, is to scan the book, the printed book. We have InDesign files, we have PDF files. There's no clear record of if there were changes made or what changes were made at the very last, and there could be at the very last second, as you all know, I'm sure. That's crazy talk. That's crazy that I have to scan a print book that's less than 5 years old to get and convert to HTML. So in these Git environments, that's supposed to be eliminated to a certain degree. We actually, the Getty, talking to the Atlas people, O'Reilly.com. O'Reilly's a big player in the space, very smart about what they do. So if you're wondering, just look what they're doing and do that. So we're talking looking at Atlas for a possible project, just as a test case to see how it works. So we'll be doing that in the future. Okay. My last statement here. GitHub is the only viable development platform for the future of digital publishing. Okay. So This is for me the future of digital publishing is the web, and the web offers a dynamic and universal and open publishing ecosystem for digital books, which I mentioned earlier. And I really believe that, and I really believe that's what books should be, and that's the future for us. And I think that these kinds of projects, GitHub, also Scalar, also just raw web design, I think we need to be going in this direction. So GitHub. GitHub allows us to observe and build from existing work, which I'll show you some examples of. We don't have to live in our bubble. We can see what other people are doing, how other people are doing it. We can take that code from them and add to it ourselves, whether, just we can copy and paste right out, take their paragraphs right out of there and just drop ours in if we need to, if there's something there that we can use like that. It encourages us to create new tools for everyone to use. So it's the site itself, GitHub itself, I think as a sort of network of people, it really, it's geared towards the sharing, the open sourcing of software. And I think that that's something that publishers should be doing. Not just not open sourcing the content of our books, but the way we build them. Open sourcing the content of books would be cool too. And then it connects to a world far deeper than books alone. So we're not just in publishing, we're on the web. there's so many resources, so many people doing these things outside of the book world. These are the people we should be looking to and working with, and they should be learning from us as well. We have a lot to teach them. Print publishers have a lot to teach them. Okay, so I'm going to run through as quick as I can some actual GitHub things that might be useful for us. There's turn.j, and this will be available so you don't have to try to write everything down. The last lines there and the non-links lines, that's the sort of, if you typed in github.com and then /blastin/turn, that would get you to their GitHub site. So it's just a shorthand for who's doing this, the user and the thing they built. So turn.js is a JavaScript file that allows you to create a very traditional, let's see if I can get it to, there we go, book. So if you really love print books and you really want them to be represented, and people love, you show your directors this and they will make you do it. But now it's open source. Now here it is. This is actually super easy to use. Book Reader, the next one. It's from the Internet Archive. This is basically, it's sort of a PDF or a facsimile reader. This is actually a specific project that a woman who's now at the Getty actually worked on with the 19th Century Art Worldwide. She is Emily Pugh, and she did this with the 19th Century Art Worldwide. This is a book reader that just becomes a sort of facsimile page turning kind of thing. They added a little tool in here, so up at the top, they've annotated these images, this manuscript, so you can turn on those annotations and then click on one, and it gives you this. So this is a scholarly project. This is a digital humanities project. It gives you, information about that image. So they went through and were sourcing all of the images and the texts and transcribing things to these scholars. So this is the thing. So they use this open source book reader to create the actual thing. Epub.js is an Epub reader. So if you're making EPUBs already and you want to put them on the web, this is a way of doing it. It basically operates much like a Kindle would, or much like an Epub reader like Kobo would, but on a website. And again, this is open source. Maybe you want an alternative presentation for your book. Here's Scroller. You're going to recognize lots of people use Scroller and its derivatives. But this is, so for low, when you're scrolling down, I'm just scrolling down the page, and you get all these animations and effects and things float and change. And this is just from, I'm not doing anything but scrolling. So Scroller is a script, is a program that allows you to sort of easily create these effects, excuse me. Deck.js is actually what I built this presentation in. It's a web, an HTML version of a slideshow. It has features like I can zoom out and see all my slides. It's obviously got the front and the navigation. It gives me a page count, so it has some of the features of PowerPoint. This is a digital book project actually that someone did called The Last Cartographer. They built it in Deck.js. I learned about Books and Browsers a couple weeks ago. So it's basically they use a slideshow program to create a narrative, which I think is pretty interesting. I think there's some sound. So they have sound embedded in here, and then every time and then as you kind of click through the different frames, it adds in these different things. And that's this example of, a book doesn't have to be a book, it can be a slideshow. It could be a PowerPoint, which is horrible, but true. Some extras, if you're not just about books, but you want to animate something, you want to make something sort of have an effect on your type. There's a number of CSS rules, a number of code rules that let you do this. This is a set of those CSS rules that lets you plug those things in automatically. You don't even need to totally understand the code. You can get up there and running with funny, these sort of funny things that you can make your type and your images and whatever else do. It's called Animate CSS. Big video JavaScript. So this is a tool that just puts a big video in the background of your thing, which I think you've probably seen a lot of these on Creativist and like a lot long form journalism use these kind of is using these sort of big videos that look very nice. And here's how you do it: open source. Some experiments. Ebook avant-garde, again from Books and Browsers. So this guy who works at O'Reilly created these sort of funny Epub plugins. This one I mouse over the words and it reveals them as I mouse over. This one, every time I touch, it leaves a fingerprint. So these are not necessarily things well, this could be like a conservation thing, you could have a painting up there and every time they touch it, no! But it's just this idea of experimenting and what can we do, why not try it, why not do it? National Novel Generating Month National Novel Writing Month, I think is now. The idea is that you spend the whole month trying to write a novel of 50,000 words. Well, a coder said, well, we should do one that's generating. So they write the program that generates a 50,000 word novel, which is usually just junk or garble, or they've somehow figured out an algorithm to produce one. So another woman, again, from O'Reilly, she created Liza Daily. She created this one from this manuscript, and it's got like this scripty words, and she pulled in these illustrations, and it's beautiful. Oh, and I have 2 minutes to finish up. But she created this just with code. It doesn't make any sense, but it's sort of beautiful. So I just like that experimental idea.
That's what matters.
Yeah, that is beautiful, right? It doesn't matter what. That's like the art book publishing 101. I don't know what I was thinking. Like, don't read the content, just it's beautiful. Some modules. Right now, we take our EPUBs, we send them out into the world, and and how people interact with those EPUBs, the table of contents, the bookmarking, the annotation, the highlighting, the note-taking, whatever, that's all controlled by the reader, by the software system that's reading them. Maybe we should be building our own versions of those things. There is an annotation, big open source annotation project going on right now that's already been adopted in a couple different places where you can just plug this in and then it gives you the chance to let people annotate your material. There is, if you want to add footnotes that float over, this was Bigfoot.js. Turn it on here. They have a funny little. So this is, if you want your notebooks, your footnotes just to pop over instead of being done. It's a kind of a fun effect or a nice effect, and it can be yours for nothing. Image zooming, there's lots of options there as well. Open source image zooming, again. Let's see. I'm getting close. Okay, and I'll just run these. I won't go through them. Platforms and tools. There's also OSCE Toolkit, which I hope you all know about and should know about. Look into it if you don't. Scalar, which we're going to hear more about. Digital Publishing Toolkit is one out of Amsterdam. It's a big project that they're they're doing some experimental stuff. They're trying to see where things can go. And the Baker framework is a really interesting one. It's actually something that allows you to take an HTML site, HTML pages, and convert them into an app really easily. A very Adobe DPS-like app. Has the same sort of functions and everything, but it's built on out of sort of open HTML, which is very cool. And now I am checked off, and you're all convinced? Thank you. All right. You're like, I don't know, Greg. I'm going to introduce our next speakers. Curtis Fletcher, I would like to welcome, is the project manager for the Alliance for Networking Visual Culture, and specifically he works on a platform he's going to talk about called Scalar. He's been with the project, how long have you been actually? About a year of that project, but he's been in a number of different projects at USC before, including the administrative assistant for the Center for Transformative Scholarship in the Digital Age, the administrative director for the program in Science, Technology, and Society, and the director of digital communications for the Visual Studies Research Institute, all at USC, and has also worked at Cambridge University Press before that. He has his PhD from USC and his BA from Berkeley, and he's going to talk to us about Scalar, so welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Everyone hear me? All 12 of you? Great. Okay, so Scalar is an authoring platform, as Greg said, built by the Alliance for Networking Visual Culture. The Alliance is essentially, it's a Mellon-funded organization that's centered at USC's School of Cinematic Arts. That's where we build Scalar. That's where much of the activity goes on. It's directed by Terry McPherson, who some of you may know. The co-PIs are all faculty at USC. And we have a small development team, a couple of front-end developers, a couple of back-end developers, a couple of designers. We have a very trusty program manager, myself. Essentially, the Alliance is a strategic set of partnerships between that critical node at USC and, on the one hand, digital archives or repositories, humanities centers, and university presses. So the aim of the Alliance, essentially, broadly speaking, is to bring together these resources, these key stakeholders or players necessary to creating and disseminating and really credentializing new forms of interactive and media-rich scholarly communication. So it brings together all the key players of this sort of scholarly ecosystem, from research to authoring to publication. And as such, we're motivated by, I guess, a different set of questions than a lot of digital public communities, certainly from Epub community. We're interested in scholarly communication, right? Scholarly publications. We're animated really by sets of questions that are critical to those three sets of stakeholders, so scholars, archives, and presses. So for instance, from the archives perspective, Scalar, we hope through Scalar to get all these new digital assets into the hands of interpretive scholars who need to use them. From the side of the scholar, they are getting the assets, but they're also getting from Scalar the capacity to test new emerging, like new modes of scholarly communication, of different ways to organize their arguments and evidence, different modes of scholarly analysis and presenting that analysis. For presses, what they're getting is, we hope, the ability to work through viable workflows for publishing online, copy editing, that sort of thing. But also, I would say, probably more importantly, it's a way of getting well-crafted, media-rich, interactive, scholarly publications or scholarly works into their hands without them having to devote hours and money that they don't have from their design departments. It's a way of scaling up in some ways, Scalar, scholarly publications online. So in the middle of all of this sits Scalar. So Scalar is an open source, basically authoring and publishing platform meant to facilitate long-form, media-rich, in some sense, in some cases, non-linear, or maybe multilinear is actually the better way to put it, born digital scholarship. So how does Scalar do it? How does it address these sort of key issues in scholarly research and authoring and publishing? This is what Scalar looks like. This is the front end. This is a typical Scalar book, although it looks like the link text has been modified with some custom CSS, but this is one of the templates. Authors have a few templates to choose from. But the layout is pretty standard. Gathers up all the media that you use that's referenced in the text on that page into a media sidebar. You have the main table of contents on the left. I'm just going to run through a couple of examples so you get sort of the look and feel of it. This was actually a piece that was featured. American Literature, the journal American Literature, actually did a special issue where they had 4 Scalar pieces, and this was one of them, done by Steve Anderson, actually, at USC. This is The Next Kids in Town. This was published by MIT Press, written by Matthew Delmont, who I think is at Claremont Colleges. This is actually the new interface that we'll be rolling out in about a month or two. The idea is to sort of update, I don't know if you noticed, but these all look sort of early 2000s, right? Not super modern, a little bit better than
Better than my title slide.
Right?
Yeah.
But there's actual CSS. But so the new interface it's an update, long coming, and it's this more. It really highlights the media. It has these really nice splash pages to introduce articles or sections of the book. And yeah, so it puts the media up front, has a sort of scrolling New York Times-y feel to it, I guess you call it. So one of the ways that Scalar addresses these issues, again, these sort of interrelated issues between these three stakeholders, the archives and the scholars doing the research and presses, we have both affiliated and non-affiliated archives, and all of the collections within those archives can be directly imported into the author's work through the authoring interface. These are some of the archives available now. And so what happens is basically when you're in the authoring interface, you can go through and search any of those collections, and then boink, 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 you grab anything from their collection, and it automatically imports it into your. So it's this more organic way of letting the author sort of engage with these materials instead of going out into the wild, grabbing them, downloading them onto their server somewhere. It allows them to just import it directly into their book. And I should say, for those of you interested, because I know there are a number of people here from museums, in early talks with archives, we found that there was a deep concern of these carefully curated objects from their collections getting sort of unmoored, right, from their collections and sort of going out into the wild. So what Scalar does is Scalar actually it imports a link and a reference to the media object and all of the metadata associated with it. The media object stays with the archive, right? It doesn't get copied over to our server. So for instance, let's go back up. That media object still resides with the Smithsonian. But what's imported in is all the metadata and a reference to it. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't manipulate everything. When you import any media object, you're given the option of managing all the metadata associated with it. Right there, one-click stop. You can also go back in and add any terms you want, any DC terms, any art store terms you can add to the media object once it's in your project. For scholars, what Scalar hopes to do is test and encourage sort of new modes, emerging genres of scholarly analysis and argumentation. And it does that a couple of ways. One, through the sort of flexibility of structuring your material in a Scalar book. We call them books. They're really projects, but we deal primarily with humanities scholars who aren't yet ready to move out of the Gutenberg era, so we call them books. So one way is through paths. So basically you gather up all your material, right? All your pages, and those pages have text, and those pages have media on them. And then the scholar decides how they're going to cut through all that material. And what you do is you create paths. Now, often those paths just end up being the same thing as chapters in a book or sections within a chapter. So you get these sort of linear, right, non-intersecting paths, and that happens a lot. Another way the scholars end up using them is sort of nested paths. So you get this sort of this skimming and diving effect where you're going linearly across this one topic, and you can either continue on that topic or you can dive deeper down the rabbit hole, as it were, deeper into that topic. So you get this sort of the reader has a choice between sort of going vertically or horizontally. But because you can reuse any material in any path, right, that is any page, what you often get, or rather sometimes get, are these sort of complex, nebulous, intersecting paths. This kind of almost choose-your-own-adventure scholarship. And in fact, we have these built-in visualizations, which I'll show you next, where what scholarship ends up looking like in some of these cases is less like just section after section after section, and more like a subway map, where you have these critical nodes where material is shared between these different contexts. Another way to organize material is through tagging. Now, tagging in Scalar is It's a little bit different than tagging in Facebook or I guess Flickr. In some ways, it is database tagging. You can just tag any number of objects. But because everything is scalar, we have this sort of what we call a flat ontology in Scalar, where everything you create in Scalar becomes its own page outright. So if you create an annotation of a piece of media, it becomes its own page. If a reader comments on your page, it becomes its own page. So we do that because we want readers and authors to be able to relate anything, any piece of material in a Scalar book with any other piece of material. So you can tag an annotation with a page which itself tags a path and another tag. So you can get these incredibly nebulous, non-hierarchical relationships between all the material in your project. So where the paths is this kind of top-down, author-dictated sequence of pages or material, and the reader's confronted with choices here and there, but largely it's this is the next page, this is the next page, this is the next page, like it is in a book. Tagging allows the reader to discover relationships between material, relationships that the author might not even necessarily been aware of. The relationships become more emergent in some ways. It's more bottom-up, or can be. So this is one of the built-in visualizations. This is the paths visualization. So you can see here that this author is organizing material. These are all, so the orange ones or beige ones are pages, and the blue are paths. Organize material along a number of paths. Some of those paths intersect. And this is a navigational feature too. You can double click on it. The author can set this visualization, and the visualization is automatically generated. All the author does is sort of organically set up the relationship between the material, between the object and the material, and it's automatically generated. And the author can set this as the default view for any page, and then the reader can click on any of these and go there. And then here's the tag visualization. A little unwieldy. So this is actually a visualization from an author at NYU, sorry, a scholar at NYU, who what she did, and again, this is, she didn't know that she could do this when she was writing her dissertation. Along came Scalar, and what she decided to do was not just write up her research. So basically, she was doing research on activist movements in New York. And so instead of just writing up the research, she basically decided to model her research in the publication itself. So she created a page for all the different activists and all the different active movements, all the different organizations, all the different themes, right, that divide up those organizations. And then she tagged the people to all the organizations that they belong to, and the organizations to all the different movements that they belong to, and the people to the movement, so forth and so on. And what she gets is a model of her research that her readers can then actually explore. Just one more visualization. This is used more by authors to sort of get a global sense of what they're doing. Everything's, again, color-coded, and the intensity of the color sort of reflects how many different things it connects to. But I mean, you know, we got a lot of feedback from scholars early on that they just had it was hard for them to get a sense, and the readers to get a sense of what the overall big picture was, right? You hold a book in your hand, and it's pretty clear that you're this far in the book, and you have this much further to go, and what chapter comes next. On websites, that's really not the case, right? You need a sitemap, and that's, in some sense, what this is, right? It's a sitemap. This is all the elements, and this is how they relate. So this is what scholarship looks like now. Okay, so for those of you interested in visual material, we also have built-in annotation for sound, image, and video. So you can annotate points along the video, and text will pop up when the playhead gets to that point. So we have scholars who will take one video and annotate it 10 times, you know, and so the text will pop up at, in a minute, and another text, another set of text at a minute and a half, and 2 minutes, and Greg already used this slide. Yeah. We support OpenSeaDragon. Wow. So just another example, right? What did we do? Greg? We went to GitHub and we grabbed OpenSeaDragon and we incorporated it, and now we support it. And now people can have these deep, zoomable, tiled images in their Scalar books, right? Right? I mean, this is exactly what you're talking about. Another thing we recently decided to support is Hypothesis. Anyone know about these guys? Yes. So these guys basically, they want Douglas Bush's dream to come alive. They want the internet to be annotated. And so they've created this great plugin for Firefox and, Chrome first, now Firefox, I think, where anyone can go and annotate any text or image online. And if you also have an account with Hypothesis and you made those annotations public, the other person made the annotations public, you can see them start a discussion thread. So it's built on a certain model of knowledge production dissemination. We'll see if it doesn't turn out that everyone just gets called a Nazi online. But so we integrated. You can now, on any of your Scalar books, basically go to the sharing tab and click it, and you don't have to download the plugin. It's automatically embedded in your Scalar book. So readers can comment and start discussions about it. It's going to be good for copy editing, too. In fact, we just had a meeting with ourselves and Hypothesis and University of California Press and University of Michigan, actually, and we're working through using Hypothesis as a basically copy editing tool for digital publications. All right, so that was a bit of a dog and pony show about Scalar, so let's get to the point. What does it all add up to, right? So like what are these features, how do these features address issues in digital research and authoring and publishing, right? How do they address issues in digital scholarship and those sort of three key areas? Well, let me offer up this example. We work with a lot of scholars in humanities centers, other scholars as well. Scalar has about 5,000 users right now. But we work very closely with scholars at our humanities centers who are partners in the Alliance. So we have this sort of direct pipeline, right, of what they need, where scholarship is going. And what we found is that a lot of scholars wanted to start creating these hybrid projects, which sort of simultaneously functioned as both an edited collection and a visual archive. So this is an example of the new interface and a book that just came out. These scholars at Claremont College basically took about 3,500 images from the Smithsonian, sort of created their own little collection, their own little archive, and then they created narrative, argumentative pathways through that material. This is a new feature where basically if you create a path, like I was talking about before, and the only thing that's in that path are pieces of media, that path will automatically generate this structured gallery view. So basically, readers have an option of either going through these sort of argumentative narratives about this collection, or browsing the collection at any point, right? So in some sense, it's sort of like it's not an article and it's not an archive, it's like an archive of the point of view, right? Which we all know archives are anyway. What does that mean? 2 minutes. Okay. So it allows for new modes of scholarship. It allows scholars to access these digital assets directly, more organically, while they're authoring. It also gives the presses that we're partnering with, and presumably other presses as well, something to work with. So Scalar was built out of the lessons that we learned. Actually, I wasn't there, not we. But what the Alliance learned, an older project called Vectors. I don't know if any of you know, but it basically was this experimental journal. Every article was built in Flash. And the way that it worked was scholars would come to USC, and they were all funded by either Mellon or NEH or USC. And 20 of them would come in the summer, and they would build these beautiful projects in Flash with our designers. And to this day, I don't think that Vectors has ever had anyone build something in Flash and submit it to them, right? So these projects are, the people do their research, and then they have to design these projects, and the projects probably cost, I don't know, $20,000 a piece, right? If you put in all the labor, that's not scalable. That digital publishing can't go that way, right? So Scalar was this effort to take what scholars want to be able to do to create these sort of beautiful, interactive, media-rich, multimodal articles and scale it. In other words, create a WordPress that will in some ways do it for them. That's what Scalar is. So for the presses, it's allowing them to get their hands on these without them having to commit, right? Everything that they don't have, right? And so we have MIT has published a couple books in Scalar. University of California Press actually just published a tome, actually a huge book, called Ghost Metropolis. And in that case, we're actually experimenting. We put it behind a paywall. We put it behind TinyPass, which we've incorporated. And they're experimenting with that. The last thing I'll say is that what Scalar does is offer up a linked data model of humanities scholarship. Scalar is, above all, a semantic platform. So all content in Scalar books and the relationships between that content is expressed in RDF. So if you annotate, so annotation X of media object Y, which is in path Z and on page D, is all expressed. All those connections, all those relationships are expressed in RDF and can be accessed via our open API. So we wanted to experiment with the idea of what happens when books become APIs, right? And we've had a number of requests from scholars who want to be able to dig into this data across books and across Scalar builds. And again, this is, I think, one of the main differences between Scalar and sort of portable publications made for readers and tablets, right? Proprietary ebooks don't talk to each other. We want to know what happens when books do talk to each other. We also want to know what happens when books talk back to the archives from which their carefully curated material is amassed, right? And so we're working on actually, well, we're working in two directions. One, we're actually working with a group, the Information Science Institute at USC, who has built a system called Karma. Anyone heard of this? Okay, a couple of people, right. So basically they've created, and correct me if I'm wrong, I know I have some survey knowledge of it, but basically they've created this system, this AI system, which with some human intervention will take a collection and convert its sort of legacy ontologies into RDF and spit out linked data. And they've created like makeshift kind of platforms where you can take I think they took like a couple thousand artifacts from the Smithsonian. I think it was the Archives of American Art collection, I can't remember. And basically created a little interface where they linked out to other objects, to other museums that relate to it, and to Wikipedia data. So we're working with them. We're also working on round-tripping data. When a scholar uses an object, we want, and archives want, that data on how it's used, who uses it, by whom, where does it go on the internet, and what's the interpretation. We want that interpretation to, so far, scholars are sort of, I don't know, they they take the material and they run, and they analyze it and they interpret it. We want the interpretation to go back to the archive, right? So far, it's been sort of siloed off. We want it to round trip. I had a slide for everything that I just said. A pretty slide that I actually made myself, believe it or not. So we don't, I mean, we know that linked data is important for the sciences, and we know that linked data is probably important for the social sciences. We don't know what linked data will do for the humanities and for museums and for archives, right? What will that semantic layer do, right? What does it mean to be able to track what happens to those objects once they go out into the wild or into publications? That's something that you just would never be able to do with, Adobe Suite. So I will end with that.
Great. Thank you. I was saying, I think to Curtis earlier before, that part of why I love putting these panels together, as much as I want to share the work that is being done in digital publishing and people doing it, I'm also this is my chance to meet them and hear them, and I'm like learning as much, so I'm really excited about everything Curtis just said. I'm gonna have Avery come up and set up, and while she's doing that, I will stand over to the side and give a little introduction. This is Avery Swartz. Swartz? Yeah, Swartz. Good. Like Shorts. Yeah, like that. She is here as the web director of the Art Canada Institute, which she's going to talk about, but she's many other things as well. She's an award-winning web designer and consultant speaker. She has started the founder and CEO of Camp Tech, which is a learning hub that provides practical tech training in fun and friendly environment. She missed my Ignite talk last night, but I haven't learned about the Camp Tech yet, but I'm very excited that she does that too. I found out after the fact that I knew she was going to do this speech or this talk. She's the web director for Art Canada Institute. She also acts as a digital advisor for Willow Breast and Hereditary Cancer Support, and teaches digital publishing and production at Ryerson University. And I want to hear more about this too. Rarely appears on CTV News as a guest tech expert. So she's like a TV star. So welcome to Avery. Thank you.
Really? Hi there. Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm Canadian. So I come from Canada. The dirty secret is I'm actually a dual citizen. I'm an American as well, but I don't usually say that a lot when I'm in Canada. But anyway, today I'm going to be totally Canadian for you because we're going to talk about a Canadian institution, a really new and fresh Canadian institution. I flew in from Toronto this morning. Toronto is like the New York of Canada. Toronto likes to think they're the center of the universe, and everybody outside of Toronto hates them. So the Art Canada Institute is a nationwide organization, but it is based in Canada. Canada is a huge country by geography, but a very small country in terms of like world population. So there's a lot of us in Toronto, and then the rest of Canada is really kind of spread out. But I want to tell you a little bit more about what we're doing at the Art Canada Institute, and particularly something we have called the Online Art Book Project. I brought some brochures that you're welcome to take after the presentation. But actually, you know what? I have a video, so you can just watch a little bit of this. This is from the CBC, which is like the BBC, but for Canada. So this is a little clip that appeared on the CBC News about the Art Canada Institute.
My name is Sara Angel, and I am the founding editorial director of the Art Canada Institute. It's been 3 years of work in creating the Art Canada Institute, which is coming to a realization this evening. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for coming to celebrate the launch of the Art Canada Institute. It's a labor of love done by myself on a volunteer basis, and as well, all of the people who are contributing to this project have worked on their material as well, really because they believed that it needed to exist. The Art Canada Institute is comprised of over 50 of the country's leading art historians and museum professionals, and they have come together because of the belief that there is simply not enough material out there on Canadian art and visual culture. And what they wanted to do was provide a way that all Canadians could have access to the stories of our artists and our history in an accessible, friendly, 21st century way. And so what that means is we decided that we would launch our inaugural program, and that program is called the Canadian Online Art Book Project. And this project is extraordinary because what it's going to see is over the next 5 years, there will be 50 online art books or ebooks on key topics and themes in Canadian art history. And these are going to be available for free.
When Sara told me about it, I thought it's a natural. So many people turn to the internet these days that seems a natural place to do it. And when she explained how she was going to do it by simply presenting a book, but in a way that you use it on the internet, was actually quite fascinating.
The most important works of art visually are being made accessible on this site. Material that previously has been kept in vaults or was only available to be seen if it was on art gallery walls. So what we're doing is we're making sure that if you live in a geographically remote place where you don't have access to an art gallery or to a museum, that then you can still be part of the conversation about Canadian art. Then you are still able to learn about it in a way that is being written by the experts, but also in a language and a voice and a style that is friendly and welcoming. The first book that we're releasing is on a London-based artist named Jack Chambers, who in the 1960s was Canada's highest paid artist. He died much too soon, tragically, when he was still in his 40s. What we are doing now is, for those people who don't know who he is, we are providing the story of his life, why he is significant, his most important artworks. Our next release is on an artist named Kathleen Mud. Now this is super interesting because Kathleen Mud, in her day, showed her art with the Group of Seven. She was well known, she was a celebrated name. If you haven't heard of her, don't be surprised. The reason is because really hardly anybody has heard of her. However, one of the things that the Art Canada Institute wants to do is to take artists who should have a notoriety, who should be a household name, and what we want to do is make them a household name.
Sometimes in Canada, in a place where we've had some great artists, some great international artists, some artists who've produced unbelievable work, we sometimes forget to love them, you know, and celebrate them. And I thought that to do this online, especially in this age of digital proliferation, it means that we can do something for ourselves at home, but it also means that we can share with the world.
The next book after that is on an artist who I think you will have heard of, the very well-renowned Canadian legend, Michael Snow.
I think any discussion of the arts is valuable, and extending it into not only books or magazines, but even into other mediums is really a wonderful thing.
What our goal is to introduce people to art. We believe that art is like a language, and the younger that you're becoming familiarized with it and learning about it, the more likely you are to then take the next step. Go to a museum, see the real thing, because you've developed that familiarity.
All right. So that was our founding, what do we call her? We just call her Sara. That was our founding editor, founding executive director, Sara Angel. She's the mastermind behind the Art Canada Institute and the Canadian Online Art Book Project. She is, without a doubt, Canada's premier art journalist and one of our leading art scholars in Canada. So she has a lot of art scholar friends and got together to make this program, particularly because of something that exists in Canada, in that Canadians are actually very bad at celebrating their own culture and their own art history in particular. For example, some of the artists that you saw in the video, I'm sure you might not have known about them, but honestly, I didn't really even know about them before I started working on this project. I'm a web designer. I come from a technical background. I have a little bit of art history knowledge, but I'm not an art scholar myself. And I'm discovering a lot of the artists through this project that I didn't even know about. We do not have a national museum for Canadian art history. We do not have a national textbook or a monograph series or a catalogue raisonné. We are very, very bad at celebrating our own artists in Canada. So hence the Canadian Online Art Book Project. It is critically acclaimed. We've got some really nice quotes from the Canadian press, so those quotes are impressive to a Canadian audience. But to tell you a little bit more about the project is the Art Canada Institute has been around for a couple of years, but those years were all planning. The actual inaugural project, the Canadian Online Art Book Project, launched a year ago, so we are a very, very new institution, and this is a very new project. We have this very ambitious idea of doing 50 titles in 5 years. All of the titles are available online, and I really like that Greg used the term web book earlier. I think that's quite apt to describe what we're doing. So each title can be read online on a website. We're at aci-iac.ca. I'll throw that up in just a moment. But the books are also available as downloadable ebooks for those that want to read them if they are offline. And our chosen ebook format is PDF, and I can explain a little bit why. We have 2 official languages in Canada, so everything is written in English and then translated into French, except for we do actually have a few books about Québécois artists that were originally written in French by Québécois writers, and then they were translated into English and then actually translated back into French because of editorial issues. That was fun. And they're free. So for every title, we're pushing out a French and English version, both online, PDF download, and then there also is a mobile version of each book. So the editorial team is vast. The image research team is vast. I head up all of the technical team. We have a big team as well. And it's all of these people that have other day jobs. Like, this is not my day job. This is a little side project that I like to do. So we have a lot of people all contributing to this. Again, like I said, this is a really needed thing in Canada because there's no authoritative and comprehensive online resource on Canadian art and its history. And also, I mean, if we had known about Scalar 2 years ago, wow, the Art Canada Institute actually may have been published on Scalar. I'm quite impressed with your platform. There are a lot of art scholars that work at the Art Canada Institute, and we make sure that the titles are peer-reviewed. They are very, very high quality publications, but they are written with a general audience in mind. So, like, I share them with my dad, and he reads them and thinks they're cool. So they're not written just for a scholarly audience. The technology behind the Art Canada Institute. So it's all built on the website. The website was custom designed, not by me. We have a creative director. And we have this whiz kid programmer who built us a proprietary PHP system. PHP is an open source programming language, but the way that he's using it is technically proprietary, although anybody that knows their way around PHP would be able to figure out what he has done. It's kind of an MVC, model view controller sort of framework. I'm a real tech nerd, so I can really get into this stuff if you want, or I can just breeze right by. And also there is a content management system, or a CMS, that is built in for the editorial team and for a number of interns and people that don't necessarily have a web programming background can log in and make the changes that are needed to the books. We do have a mobile version of all the books, and the way that we're doing mobile right now is through browser detection, which I actually think was like really the wrong way to go, but it was kind of already, that train had already left the station by the time I joined the project. So that's something for like 2.0. I would not use browser detection. We'd probably go responsive. And then the PDFs that we make for our ebooks, this is a little crazy because we never have a print version of our books. Our books are always digital. We're born digital like Scalar. So how do you do, like, you know, how do you push out to an ebook without necessarily ever going through InDesign or DPS and exporting as an EPUB or something like that? So we're like, oh gosh, how are we going to have the artistic control over the layout and all of the rich imagery and the interactivity that we want on the web, but also be able to give that to people in a downloadable ebook format? So that's why we went with PDF, because it was kind of like the worst, like the best of all worst case scenarios, I guess. And we use an API, and you can find this API. It's called PDF Crowd, and if you just Google it, you'll find it's called the PDF Crowd API. It dynamically converts the PHP, HTML, and CSS that comes out of our website and spits out a PDF. I do have some control over some of the CSS in particular with that API, but it is pretty limiting. I mean, you're welcome to download some of our PDFs and have a look at them, but I like the web version better than the PDF version of our books, just because of that, the constraints of the technology. Some of the biggest challenges we've faced so far on the project, number one is scalability and growth. The idea that we know we're going to push out 50 books, then we want to do even more beyond that. Canada is celebrating a really large anniversary in 2017. It's Canada's I can't say that. 150 years, sesquicentennial, you know what I mean. So, you know, trying to build the website and build it on a platform in a way that we can kind of future-proof it and add to it and do new projects, add new things, without necessarily having to rip the entire website apart and rebuild it every time we want to add something new. So that's always been a real challenge for us. When we were first building the system, I swear I had nightmares, and I would like seriously wake up in the middle of the night thinking, oh my gosh, we're building on the wrong platform. This is going to be dead in 5 years. What are we going to do? And I was thinking to myself, if this was 1994, we would have been making a CD-ROM, and where are CD-ROMs now? And what are we building on now? And is this going to be the CD-ROM of the future? And how is this going to then be translatable from this technology to a future technology? And I just had to kind of let it go, because that was one of my biggest worries as the technical lead on the project. The editorial team was kind of blissfully unaware that they should be concerned about things like that. I mentioned this a little bit, but again, like which ebook technology to use. I teach digital publishing at a university in Toronto. I know a lot about what you can do with EPUB, and I know a lot about what you can't do with EPUB. So it was a very quick decision to not even go down the EPUB road for an art book, but then not necessarily want to go into Adobe DPS or Apple iTunes, iBook Store and iBooks, because you can get a lot of the rich beauty that you would want in an art book through iBooks. But then I was really, really concerned about having to rebuild every book on a different platform than the platform we were already doing. And then again, what would kind of be the future proofness of that platform? So that's how we kind of landed on PDF. And for now, that's what we have, and we'll see. Images and copyright. I'm sure that's a big issue for everyone. In Canada in particular, like I would love to have us on like Scalar and piggybacking off of other images, but I suspect you probably don't have a lot of Canadian visual artists built into that system. Maybe a bit, but we're trying hard to really unearth like some stuff that is deep in the vaults of Canadian art museums that just has not ever been seen by the Canadian public. So getting the copyright and telling museums that they should give us the copyright and they should give us almost carte blanche of what we can do with the digital stuff. Like right now we're building a Pinterest page and now we have to go back and look at all of our contracts for all of the images and say, oh gosh, we got the clearance to publish this beautiful painting in our book, but can we also put it up on our Pinterest page? It's fun. And then also one of our big things is, big challenges is the human factor of really pushing an editorial team that comes very much from the print and offline world into this new crazy online new space. A lot of training and tech knowledge are some big hurdles on our team. Trying to get us on, I would love to get us on GitHub, or we use a private Git system that does version control, and we use we have a repo, and we can push out using that, and we can commit using our private Git, but the idea more of like putting editors on some sort of a version control system, it's hard for me to even get them on project management software, like not to mention like getting them on Git. So that's been a real challenge for me is dealing with the editorial team, and just it's been fun, actually. It's been really fun. And some of like the oldest, like just by age, some of the oldest editors on the team have been the most open to embracing new technology. So we are doing it. We keep doing it. We've pushed out 10 books that are available on the site right now. The 11th is coming out in 2 weeks. We are on schedule for those 50 books in 5 years. We've had like overwhelming in Canadian terms of positive critical and public reception. Over 130,000 page views, and we've done very little web marketing. So that's purely just organic traffic that's coming to the site. And we have a really, really high average session duration on our site. People are going to our sites and diving into the books and sticking around. If I could do it all over again from scratch, we'd go responsive instead of browser detection for the mobile version. We would do more user testing and research at some key stages. And something else that's now I'm really starting to think about a lot is accessibility, particularly WCAG accessibility. Canada and our lovely, wonderful, kooky socialist country, WCAG accessibility is now mandated by law in most provinces in Canada. So if it's not something that we wanted to do before because it's just good web standards, being in compliance to WCAG, I think A 2.0. Oh, WCAG is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's a standard published by the W3C, which is the governing body that kind of decides what becomes the standard of the web and what doesn't. Like when Greg was talking about the browser wars, the W3C were the group that was like, okay guys, get your stuff together. We all have to be on the same page with this stuff. We're gonna say what is and what isn't the approved standard for the languages of the web. And one of their branches is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and there's the A level, the AA level, the AAA level of kind of being in compliance with them. And it's mostly for anybody that's trying to access the web that has any kind of disability, including colorblindness. And red-green colorblindness is a really large part of the population, something that I know our creative director and our art director are not thinking about when they're making beautiful art books, they're not thinking about accessibility for the blind, accessibility for color blindness, people that use screen readers, etc. So that's something that that we're starting to finally really take seriously. And as we're going to start to make little tweaks to the system as we keep going, everything will have WCAG accessibility in mind. So if you want to check out the Art Canada Institute, it's Art Canada Institute, Institut de l'Art Canadien, because you know it's French and English, so ACI-IAC.ca, that's the country code for Canada. We're on Twitter as Art Can Institute, and I'm Avery Swartz on Twitter. You can tweet at me. And like I said, I brought these beautiful like little brochures all the way from Canada, so please take one, because I don't want to put them in the recycling bin. But yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.
All right, I'm excited. I don't know about you all. I have some questions myself, but I open up first if anyone would like to ask any questions. Yes. Right in the front. You, yeah. Oh, and I'll repeat. If you could actually speak into the microphone. We're recording.
Oh, yeah, they record it.
They're recording the audio of the thing, and so they would appreciate having that. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Oh my, I don't know. Is
Hello?
all right, I'll repeat the question. How about?
Right, for all three of you, maybe more so for Curtis, we're building a digital collection at my museum.
Mm-hmm.
A hope is that we can create metadata object files that will serve digital preservation, but also digital publishing. So we're investigating Met's mods and RPM, but there are more tools for Met's mods and those types of objects. Any recommendations or warnings for someone in the early stage?
So the question was that they in creating online collections and the metadata for those collections, how can those things be? Are there recommendations or best practices for making that metadata usable for digital publishing needs down the road in the future, or is that fair? No more.
Yeah, that's, I think
More to.
the answer will suggest the question.
I told Greg that I knew I was going to get a question about metadata. So I don't know much of my knowledge of metadata is super survey. But we have on our team a metadata specialist. His name is Craig Dietrich, and if I'll give you my contact info and I can put you in touch with him, and he can definitely flesh all of that out for you. But I can't answer I don't know. That's not the sort of stuff that I'm privy to. That's stuff for the development team. But I would gladly hand it over to him. He knows everything about that.
Let's see if this is on. Hello. I'm not familiar with the platforms that you named, but the one thing I would be looking into is whether or not they're, like, if you can just export as pure XML. XML is the, like, lamest, old school, goofy little language, but it's as open source as it gets. Like, any XML can always just be ported from one thing to another. Like, if you just write your metadata in strict XML, then no problems for the future.
Both of those, I think, are XML
Okay.
different schemas.
Right, okay.
And there's schemas that would enable us to contribute or participate in larger projects like EPLA.
Got it.
Or hopefully some publishing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and I'm with the other two. I don't have the sort of technical knowledge to answer on specific platforms, unfortunately. But I think that, and I think that answers the question in a way, in that digital publishing isn't there yet. We would love to be. I know at the Getty we are moving forward with some things that will do better at connecting our books with our own collection, like our backlist books, what has been published, and where those, what if there's a collection image in our collection site, there should also be a reference directly to the book, and if possible, into that exact page, if possible. So I would say to you lead the way, like tell us, what the best practices are, but anything you can do to keep it as open as possible and as sort of generalized as possible certainly is good. But yeah, yeah. Okay. More questions? Yes. You. Yeah. You.
When you author texts, does the author specify what the relationship is to kind of complete the triple between the two entities?
Yes.
And is that based on some kind of ontology and where you are in the construct of author?
So the question is, when the author is setting up when the author is setting up relationships between content and a scalar book, whether or not they're setting up the ontologies, or whether or not the relationship's automatically there, the author sets up the relationship by, say, tagging one thing with another, or putting something in a path, or creating an annotation of a video or a sound file. The ontologies are built in on the semantic layer, from what I understand. So it's Dublin Core. And so the author can go in and manipulate all of those ontologies, but for the sort of built-in relationships in the Scalar platform, so tagging, paths, annotation, that sort of thing, those are automatically generated for the author.
And then about importing and exporting data, can that be done at an entity level, or do you kind of have to do a full dump of everything?
Yeah, right now you have to do a full dump of everything through the open API. Yeah, we're working on sort of, being able to make that more granular, like making calls to certain paths within a book or something like that. But right now it's just sort of this big RDF dump.
And is anyone using Scalar to kind of satisfy their OSCE mandate?
So the OSCE project there's a formal grant for those who might not know. The Getty Foundation granted 8 institutions money to explore online catalog publishing, and it's called the OSCE Grant, Online Scholarly Cataloging Initiative. Then the IMA lab starting with work with Art Institute of Chicago and now some others, developed a tool called the OSCE Toolkit, which I mentioned earlier, and it was used in a number of those platforms. None of those projects from that first grant cycle use Scalar as a solution, though I think it certainly could. And I know a number of those institutions are continuing on in their own projects, and some others will be coming along, not funded through the Getty necessarily, but I think Scalar could be a potential. But yeah, it hasn't been done yet. As far as I know, I don't think there's any collections yet. We have time for one more, if you have one. Yes, in the back.
I'm kind of glad I stumbled into this presentation.
Me too.
It to be a different one. But
call it like it is.
I work for Department of National Defense in Canada.
Yay!
I'm one of my areas of responsibility is putting together our publishing.
Awesome.
For the Directorate of History and Heritage. We no longer publish history books.
Yeah.
So I was looking at your different platforms for publishing. And as you were giving your presentation, I was exactly thinking, have you considered the accessibility factor? Because that's something we're struggling with.
Huge.
Completely.
Huge.
So, although we have to make everything bilingual, we're having a hard time meeting the accessibility requirements because there isn't any platform out there. They're all very innovative, flashy, can do a lot of things. But when it comes to accessibility and the disabled, we haven't been able to find one that takes that into account.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I won't repeat your question because it wasn't really a question. It was more like a convo. But yeah, so I think you touched on something really interesting and something else that came up with the Art Canada Institute and the idea of doing the Canadian Online Art Book Project as an online project. That woman you saw in the video, she comes from a very large publishing background and comes from the print world. And so when she thought up the program, the first thing she thought of was do a print series, but then realized, like I'm sure your department has, that Canada is a small country population-wise, and with there not being so much of a market for a large print run, to meet the print minimums in order to make a print run economical, all of a sudden when you run the math, it doesn't make any sense anymore. So that's why we went online in the first place, was because it made more sense mathematically. But now looking at yeah, like publishing platforms that are easy to use and still look good. Like that's one of my big problems with accessibility. I'm so pro accessibility as a programmer, but the web designer in me is a bit like, oh, it's not so pretty. When,
I have the same issue as you do because I also have to support the Canadian Forces Artist Program.
Sure, yeah.
The old World War I and World War II War Artist Program where we deployed artists to war zones.
Yeah, like Alex Colville.
Exactly.
And
now we have to somehow make that accessible.
Accessible and still really attractive and appealing so that, gosh darn it, Canadians will learn about their heritage. It's really, really hard, and that is another one of the reasons why we went with a custom-built platform, that it could satisfy all of our wish lists and still can, hopefully, as we move forward with it. Because other stuff right out of the box. I mean, WordPress is fairly accessible right out of the box, and there's been a lot of work being done by the WordPress Foundation to make WordPress more accessible. They're really seeming to make that a high priority. But WordPress, geez, that's a whole nother presentation about the pros and cons of using WordPress as a publishing platform.
There's, have you heard of Pressbooks?
No.
There's a company called Pressbooks. When talking about WordPress, they built a publishing platform on top of WordPress that outputs to PDF, Epub, and some other things. So that might be an interesting thing to look into too. But yeah, I think the accessibility thing requires a sort of dumbing down of the design, certainly at this point, which is sort of frustrating in a lot of levels, especially for art publishing or really visual kind of publishing or animated interactive. So that's, I think, all the time we have. I have to let you all go and give up the room. Thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your conference. Oh, and sorry. Didn't mean to stop your call. I promised I would encourage you all to fill out the surveys that are scattered around in the chairs. Leave them up here if you do, so it helps MCN, the programming committee, kind of evaluate how sessions are going and what to do for next year. Thanks.
All right, nice.